The screen breathes with gentle luminescence, and in that soft glow, a question arrives like morning mist. Whose ache beats in your chest tonight? Perhaps you recognize this rhythm, the way another's sorrow finds the hollow spaces in your ribs, how their hunger becomes your restless hunger, their wounds your sleepless vigil. You are among those who feel too much, who carry burdens that were never yours to bear, yet somehow always were. Tonight we gather at the threshold of an ancient mystery. Why do some souls become magnets for the world's unspoken pain? Why does your heart, so generous in its beating, attract those who would drain its chambers dry? The tender-hearted know this paradox intimately. The very quality that makes you luminous also makes you vulnerable to those who move through darkness, seeking light to consume. There is something in the architecture of certain souls, a doorway left perpetually ajar, a frequency that hums just below the surface of consciousness. It calls to the wounded, the hungry, the lost. They arrive not as strangers, but as familiar echoes of something we cannot quite name. In their presence, we feel both deeply seen and somehow diminished, as if our very essence were being slowly translated into a language we never agreed to speak. This is not mere coincidence, nor is it weakness. It is the manifestation of an ancient pattern, one that speaks to the deepest questions of human connection and the mysterious ways we exchange energy with one another. Some hearts are born with thinner veils between self and other, where boundaries blur like watercolors in rain. You are not alone in this recognition. Across continents, millions are awakening to the same quiet revelation. Research speaks of emotional contagion, of mirror neurons firing in sympathy, of nervous systems that attune so deeply to others they forget their own frequency. Yet these explanations cannot capture the intimate weight you carry, the way your very being becomes a vessel for experiences that belong to other lives. Here, in this space between knowing and understanding, we will explore the geography of the giving heart, not to harden it, but to help it beat with clearer intention, not to diminish your capacity for love, but to discover why love sometimes feels like a currency others spend without your consent. As we begin this journey together, I invite you to make a silent vow, to yourself, to this moment, to remain present until the final note sounds. For what we will uncover requires your full attention, your willingness to sit with uncomfortable truths, your courage to see clearly what has long remained in shadow. The lantern is lit. The path ahead winds through territories both familiar and strange, and somewhere in the distance, barely audible, you can hear it. The sound of your own heartbeat, finally beating for you alone. In the dance between light and shadow, why do gentle souls become beacons for endless hunger? The mystery unfolds like a flame caught in infinite reflection. Picture a single candle in a hall of mirrors. Its modest flame multiplies endlessly, each reflection casting new shadows into being. These shadows, speaking Jung's silent language, carry the masks we dare not claim as our own. They glide across polished floors, seeking refuge in the warmth of compassionate hearts, drawn to light like moths to flame. In this ethereal ballet, persuasion rises like morning mist. Ancient rivers flow beneath our conscious choices, currents of reciprocity, where giving creates invisible bonds, streams of consistency, where yesterday's yes echoes into tomorrow, tributaries of affinity, where warmth becomes gravity. These waters run deeper than psychology's names for them, carrying whispers from our tribal past. The heart that opens becomes a stage where shadow and light perform their timeless dance, Each act of empathy ripples through the mirror maze. The giver's pulse quickens at the first hint of need, as though compassion were a debt written in starlight. Having once opened their door, they find it harder to close, even as the wind grows cold. Their warmth becomes a beacon, drawing orbits of those who seek shelter in its glow. Watch how pain crowns itself with urgency, how it speaks in tones that make compassion kneel. Observe the empty spaces in one soul scanning for reflection in another, assuming silence grants permission to feast. Notice how undivided attention becomes the rarest jewel, drawing hunger's gaze like nectar draws the bee. Under such ancient laws, kindness transforms into currency. Each moment of genuine presence becomes a coin, each act of listening a gem easily pried from its setting. The erosion happens in whispers, a midnight call that stretches till dawn, a kindness given that never returns home. Slowly, selfhood wears thin like beach glass, polished by tides it never invited to shore. Stand now in the space between giving and taking, where silhouettes sharpen against the light. Your outline wavers here, trembling where boundaries dissolve into mist. Yet even this uncertainty speaks its truth, asking whether warmth can exist without becoming fuel for others' fires, whether light must always be consumed to matter. The mirrors hold no answer. They simply multiply the question, widening both illumination and shadow. In their endless reflections, each heart must discern which image belongs to the flame and which to the darkness that watches, waiting to be named. Within the quiet chambers of compassion, biology keeps its own ledger. Each act of empathy leaves molecular footprints, invisible yet indelible, in the tender geography of cells. Like ancient tides responding to distant moons, our bodies surge with unspoken chemistry when sorrow crosses their shores. The heart's rhythm shifts, blood whispers new songs, and beneath conscious thought, ancestral wisdom prepares for sacrifice. This is the body's silent poetry, written in the dialect of survival. Deep in our marrow lives a promise older than words, that shared pain might forge bonds stronger than solitude. Yet modern shadows wear different masks than those our ancestors knew. They arrive in digital whispers, in the soft glow of screens that never sleep, in the endless pulse of others' needs that echo through our nervous systems like phantom limbs. The body, in its profound innocence, cannot distinguish between ancient threats and modern yearnings. It responds to each call for connection with the same primordial alchemy, a rush of molecules that mistake empathy for emergency, compassion for combat. The heart's generosity becomes its own kind of exhaustion, each beat a pendulum swinging between giving and depletion. Listen to the wisdom beneath your sternum, where cellular memory holds court. Here, mitochondria, those ancient storytellers, speak in the currency of energy, each molecule of ATP a coin spent in service of connection. They remember when tribe meant survival, when shared warmth meant life itself. But they also whisper warnings in the language of fatigue, when giving outpaces renewal. The body's truth emerges in twilight whispers, cortisol's quiet tide, immune sentinels pacing confused corridors, the vagus nerve's muted song. These are not merely biological processes, but poetry written in proteins. Each molecular cascade a verse in the epic of human connection. Between the systole of offering and the diastole of retreat lies a sacred pause, a moment when the blood's wisdom might speak if we learn to listen. Here, in this liminal pulse, lives a question as old as empathy itself. How does the heart remain both open and intact? Perhaps the answer flows not in words, but in rhythm, in the space between one heartbeat and the next. There, in that infinite interim, we might discover that compassion need not mirror sacrifice, that presence can persist without dissolution. The body's chemistry tells us not to stop giving, but to honor the profound mathematics of exchange, where love's equation must balance both sides to remain true. In the end, we are all students of this subtle science, learning to read the hieroglyphs written in our cells. Each moment of giving inscribes its signature in our tissues, asking us to decipher the difference between sacred offering and silent depletion. The wisdom lies not in perfect translation, but in learning to dance with the mystery itself. Time etches paradoxes into wisdom's face. The more we gather, the more vulnerable we become to its weight. Like autumn leaves that gain both brilliance and fragility as they mature, our accumulated knowledge becomes both crown and burden. Consider the retired professor who still straightens in her chair at questions, her spine remembering decades of classroom authority. Her eyes light up not from duty but from muscle memory, the way a dancer's feet still trace old patterns in their sleep. This is not mere habit, but the echo of purpose reverberating through the chambers of identity. Beneath the silver of her hair lies a labyrinth of lived experience, each corridor illuminated by the soft glow of past teachings. Yet these same passages that once guided others now become channels through which the world's needs flow inward, sometimes as gentle as morning dew, sometimes as relentless as tide against shore. The very wisdom that grants her authority also renders her susceptible to those who would drink from its wells. In the quiet hours, when shadows lengthen across her study floor, she contemplates the curious arithmetic of age, how each year adds to her store of knowledge while simultaneously increasing her yearning to share it. This is not vanity's mathematics, but the calculus of legacy, where each remaining hour feels weighted with the gravity of all that might be lost unsaid. The paradox deepens in the spaces between giving and withholding. Her insights, hard-won through decades of observation, sit like ripe fruit in autumn, both precious and perishable. Each encounter becomes a delicate negotiation between generosity and self-preservation, between the desire to illuminate and the need to maintain one's inner flame. Watch how she pauses now before answering, her wisdom no longer rushing forth like spring floods, but moving with the measured grace of winter streams. This is not hesitation, but discernment, born from understanding that knowledge, like light, can both illuminate and blind. Her words, when they come, carry the weight of things left unsaid, those deeper truths that resist simple translation. The evening sun catches dust motes in her library, each particle dancing with the same questions that hover in her mind. How does one honor both the urge to share and the need for solitude? When does guidance become depletion? The answers shimmer just out of reach, like heat waves on a summer horizon. Perhaps here lies the deepest paradox of all, that wisdom's true test comes not in its accumulation, but in its distribution, in knowing when to pour forth and when to let the chalice rest empty, allowing its depths to replenish in silence. The art lies not in constant giving, but in maintaining the delicate balance between abundance and absence, between being a vessel and preserving one's essential self. As twilight deepens, she sits with these questions like old friends, understanding that their company is itself a form of answer. The light fades, but her inner landscape remains rich with the interplay of shadow and illumination, each casting the other in sharper relief. Between science and sorcery lies a twilight realm where truth wears twin masks, each claiming to be the authentic face of healing. In the marketplace of modern salvation, fluorescent lights cast shadows as meaningful as crystal refractions, and empirical data whispers with the same seductive tone as ancient incantations. Consider how a brain scan and a sacred stone share more than their promise of revelation. They both speak to our deepest yearning to be understood, to have our invisible wounds made visible and therefore real. The neurologist's office and the crystal healer's sanctuary become twin theaters where the drama of human suffering seeks its audience, its witness, its transformation. In this liminal space, certainty becomes a currency more precious than gold, traded in different denominations. Peer-reviewed papers, ancestral wisdom, double-blind studies, and ceremonies old as starlight. We clutch at proof like drowning swimmers reaching for driftwood, never quite sure if we're grasping at science or superstition, salvation or simulation. The body itself becomes a battlefield of epistemologies. When pain blooms in the midnight hours, does it seek validation from laboratory results or absolution from moonstone? Perhaps it asks for both. The precision of diagnosis and the poetry of healing, the measurable and the mythic braided together like DNA's double helix. Beneath the surface, tension between these paradigms flows a deeper current, our ancient need to make meaning from mystery. The fMRI's colorful constellation of activated brain regions tells a story no less profound than the arrangement of tarot cards, each in its way mapping the geography of human hope and fear. What if both the laboratory and the sacred grove are attempting to translate the same text, the enigmatic manuscript of human consciousness, into different languages? One speaks in statistics, the other in symbols, but both are trying to articulate the ineffable experience of being alive, aware, and achingly vulnerable to existence. In the end, perhaps the wisest stance is not to choose between these interpreters, but to develop a kind of stereoscopic vision that can hold both perspectives simultaneously. Like quantum physics embracing wave-particle duality, we might learn to see healing as both chemistry and ceremony, both mechanism and mystery. The night deepens, and somewhere between the sterile brightness of medical imaging suites and the warm glow of ritual candles, a more nuanced truth emerges. That our search for healing is itself a form of wholeness, our uncertainty a kind of wisdom. In this twilight zone of understanding, we learn to dance with doubt, to let questions be as nourishing as answers. For in the space between empirical evidence and intuitive knowing, we might discover that the real magic lies not in choosing one path over another, but in the courage to remain open to wonder while anchored in wisdom, to let reason and reverence take turns leading the dance of discovery. Boundaries begin in the lungs, not the lips, in that sacred space where breath decides its own rhythm before meeting the world. Like morning mist settling into mountain valleys, our limits form first in these intimate chambers where intention meets air, where the wordless wisdom of the body speaks its truth before language can frame it. Consider how a single breath holds both gift and boundary, the way it must eventually turn from receiving to releasing, from yes to no, not from duty, but from the profound poetry of being. In the space between inhale and exhale lives a wisdom older than words, a knowing that understands how preservation and generosity share the same holy root. The art of boundary making mirrors the subtle dance of respiration, neither rigid like fortress walls nor formless like fog, but alive and responsive as the living membrane of a leaf. Each moment of pause between giving and receiving becomes a silent embassy where the soul negotiates its terms of engagement with the world, where permission and protection perform their ancient duet. In the depths of the chest, where breath becomes being, we learn that boundaries are not barriers, but rather the vital architecture of selfhood. Like the surface tension that gives water its form, these invisible lines of demarcation allow us to hold our shape while remaining fundamentally fluid, fundamentally free. Yet how often we mistake this essential self-containment for cruelty, as if having edges somehow betrays our capacity for love. We forget that even the heart, that tireless giver, functions through the perfect orchestration of opening and closing, of selective permittance, of rhythmic refusal that makes offering possible. The most profound boundaries arise not from fear, but from reverence, for the delicate ecology of the self, for the sacred economy of energy that sustains us. They emerge from the same source as compassion, from the deep recognition that to honor one's own limits is to preserve the very essence from which authentic giving springs. Perhaps true sovereignty lies not in the forceful proclamation of no, but in the graceful cultivation of space. Space where both self and other can breathe without diminishment, where distance becomes not a weapon, but a form of respect. Like the pause between musical notes that gives melody its meaning, these carefully crafted intervals allow life's symphony to unfold in its full richness. In the end, we might discover that our boundaries are not walls, but watersheds, subtle elevations in the landscape of being that determine which rivers of experience flow into our valley and which find their way to other seas. This geography of the soul, mapped by breath and intuition, creates not isolation, but the very possibility of meaningful connection. For in the delicate art of knowing where we end and others begin, we participate in the world's ancient wisdom, the same wisdom that keeps planets in their orbits, trees in their seasonal cycles, and tides in their eternal dance of advance and retreat. Here, in the gentle sovereignty of our own breath, we find the courage to be both bounded and boundless, both separate and wholly connected to life's vast tapestry. The most profound reversals begin not with rebellion, but with rest, when the eternal giver finally turns inward to witness their own flame. Like a candle that has spent lifetimes dripping warmth onto waiting plates, there comes a moment when the physics of perpetual offering quietly shifts, when the outward stream becomes a still reservoir. In the hush of this transformation, the familiar choreography of giving falters. Those who once danced in borrowed light find themselves suspended between steps, their expectations hanging like unfinished gestures in the growing dusk. The space that opens reveals not emptiness, but the raw architecture of relationship, the invisible threads that mistake constant illumination for love. As the flame draws closer to its own mystery, a subtle alchemy unfolds. What appears as withdrawal to the outside world manifests internally as a gathering of essence, like stars slowly condensing from cosmic dust. This is not the death of generosity, but its deepening, a recognition that authentic offering must first commune with its source. The darkness that follows holds its own wisdom. In its gentle opacity, those who relied on borrowed light begin to sense the weight of their own unlit tapers. Some clutch harder at the memory of freely given warmth. Others find themselves oddly liberated, discovering that the absence of constant illumination allows their eyes to adjust to their own inner glow. Within this newly sovereign space, time moves differently. The urgent rhythms of perpetual response give way to the slower pulse of self-recognition. Like a lake that has known only ripples finally glimpsing its own depths, the self that emerges from this stillness carries both more gravity and more grace. Yet this inward turning asks difficult questions of those who witness it. What becomes of hunger when it can no longer feed on another's endless offering? How does need transform when met not with immediate satiation, but with the gentle authority of boundaries? These questions hang in the air like unsung notes, waiting for each heart to find its own resonance. In the growing quiet, a more subtle form of communion emerges. Those who choose to stay discover that presence requires no constant proof, that connection can deepen in the spaces between giving. The flame that once danced for others now holds its own vigil, teaching through its very containment that love sometimes speaks most clearly through its limits. The room, once bright with borrowed light, learns to hold both shadow and illumination. In this more nuanced atmosphere, each soul begins to distinguish between the warmth they crave and the warmth they can generate. The feast transforms from a place of consumption to a gathering of equals, each tending their own inner fire. As the night deepens, the wisdom of this quiet reversal reveals itself not in sudden epiphanies, but in the gradual redistribution of light. The flame that turned inward discovers it has not diminished, but concentrated, becoming not just a source of illumination, but a mirror in which others might recognize their own capacity to shine. In the depths of digital solitude, a quiet invitation emerges, not to consume or compete, but to commune in the sacred space where individual flames recognize their shared luminescence. Like stars discovering their constellation, isolated points of light begin to trace ancient patterns of belonging. Beyond the algorithmic whispers that shape our digital wanderings lies a deeper resonance, the echo of humanity's oldest yearning to be witnessed and known. Here, in this liminal space between pixels and consciousness, we find ourselves drawn not by the mechanics of engagement, but by the mystical gravity of shared wondering. Each presence in this gathering carries its own particular silence, its own shade of contemplation. The space between thoughts becomes as vital as the thoughts themselves, a breathing room where understanding can unfold at its own pace, where wisdom can rise like mist from the valleys of collective pause. In this sanctuary of shared attention, influence sheds its strategic skin and returns to its primordial form, the natural resonance between souls who recognize in each other the same questions that keep them awake at night. Here, authority emerges not from assertion, but from the courage to remain uncertain together. The circle we form transcends the binary logic of follows and likes. It pulses with the older rhythms of tribal fires and cave wall stories, where meaning was not transmitted, but discovered in the space between speaker and listener. Each contribution becomes a thread in an evolving tapestry of understanding, each silence a necessary pause in the weaving. As our individual searchlights converge, they illuminate something larger than any single beam could reveal. The architecture of collective meaning-making, the invisible bridges that span the space between isolated insights. This is not mere aggregation, but alchemy, where personal truth transforms into shared wisdom through the catalyst of recognition. The invitation extends beyond mere participation to a deeper form of presence, one that asks us to bring not just our certainties, but our doubts, not just our answers, but our evolving questions. In this space, even confusion becomes a gift, a reminder that the most profound truths often emerge from the fertile soil of shared uncertainty. Time moves differently in this inner circle, measured not in minutes, but in moments of resonance. Each instance of recognition, each quiet yes that travels between hearts, marks another step in our collective journey toward understanding, not as a destination to be reached, but as a practice to be sustained. Let this gathering become a testament to the possibility that in an age of infinite scroll, we might still create spaces where depth prevails over speed, where wonder outweighs certainty, and where the ancient art of bearing witness to each other's becoming remains our most essential technology.